Hello YouTube, it is Cuber again with a lovely and hopefully not scuffed tutorial, which took me a few tries to begin. This, I know, may look a little bit unfamiliar to people. This is Sony Vegas. I usually do my tutorials on Kdenlive, but there are certain things that Sony Vegas can do that Kdenlive cannot, or at least that Vegas can do better. So I am trying to move away from the software in general, but I do still use it for a few things, and I want to show you some of the tips and tricks that I adhere to in Sony Vegas, and I'm especially going to focus on things that can be performed better in Sony Vegas than they can in Kdenlive. So I have a little test bed set up here. I have an old widescreen video, I have an old full screen video, I have one of my logos, and I have a test pattern here that's just a rainbow. So I won't go over the process of just importing media. I think that's pretty straightforward. You select that you want to import media, and then it'll pull up a file explorer, and anything that you select gets put into the project. So it's once you're already in your project that I'm going to be focusing on. So most of the fun that we have in our programs are in adding the effects, the plugins, and those are all stored under video effects. Now you can take a look at what these look like by moving around onto the name of the effect, and then each effect will have a certain set of presets that you can preview on this little eye, and then you can just drag it onto the video if you want. So for example, this one looks absolutely broken, so I'm not going to use that. Let's say I want to add the infrared color curve preset to my media. I'm going to use my Paramount test video here, and I'll just drag it on. And now you can see that it looks, it's got a weird color effect on it. Excuse me a minute here. And of course, there are folks that like to do multi-renders, that like to stack effects like crazy on things. So in order to do that, all you have to do is drag another effect on, and essentially what these do is they stack. So what happens here is that we are applying the color curves effect first, then we are applying lab adjust with inverse luminosity. Now the order of the effects does matter. So let's look at what inverse luminosity does. So inverse luminosity essentially makes bright colors dark and dark colors bright, but it doesn't change the hue. So red colors are still red, blue colors are still blue, etc. So say we want to apply color curves after we invert the luminosity, but we've got these in the wrong order. Oh no, what are we going to do? Well, we just take lab adjust, we drag it before color curves, and there we go. So it's very easy to change the order of effects. If you are playing around with new effects, then I highly advise that not only do you tweak the settings within each effect, but you also tweak the order to see possible things that change. Now, admittedly, a lot of times I don't use these previews. I don't drag them on to the video. Typically what I do if I know what I'm looking for is I will just, hang on, let me do that again, is I'll click this little FX here on the video event. And if I know that I want to use the color curves effect, then I will just double click it and it gets added. If I want to add the, I don't know, TV simulator effect, I just double click that, and maybe I want to add the unsharp mask effect, because why not? I just double click them in the order that I want, and obviously I can move these around later on if I so choose. And once you add them, you can change them as you like. they do provide presets to make your life easier. For example, the infrared is one that I've used for some of my past effects, but you don't have to use a preset. You can start with the default if you want, and you can manually change some of the properties of the effect. For example, if I wanted to change the red color curve, I could do that here. Maybe make like a sigmoid shape. I'll uncheck these effects, see what it looks like. So it looks like we've made brighter colors a little bit more red, darker colors a little bit less red, which is kind of what I expect from this little experiment that I've done here. Another thing that I want to point out that I just did is I checked and unchecked an effect. If you want to preserve an effect on your video in case you want to go back to it, but you don't want it to be active, then you can just hit a little check mark and it'll turn off the effect. You can click it again to turn it on. So this is something that you can use if you ever want to, if you're in the process of building an effect and maybe you just want to see what part of it looks like before you move on to the next part. That's totally fine. So now I can stack this with TV Simulator. The default preset is TV Look. And another thing you can do is you don't have to start with defaults or reset to none. You can start with one of the presets and then you can change that at will. You can mess with the settings, and then you can try a preset that looks like something you may want, and then see if it's something you really care for. Play your video. If you like it, and of course you can always go back and change any of the settings. So the effect stacking, just really what you have to keep in mind is that the order of the effects does matter, but you can do pretty much anything you want with each individual effect. Something else I want to talk about that's very special about Vegas. Kdenlive can do this, but Vegas does it much better, is animating effects. This is one I'm very fond of, and I use it for a lot of color changing effects. For example, I use it with all of the wallpapers that I make in Diamond. So I'm just going to add an effect, HSL adjust. Say I want to cycle the hues in this video over the course of the entire video. So normally what I would do is I would gradually increase this value. You can see in the background that it's changing, but it's only going to be one value at a time unless I animate it. So if you want to animate an effect, what you can do is just click the little clock. Some effects don't support animation, but most do. So if you see this little clock here, you can animate, and you can say what time in the video event you want to animate this effect. And say I just want to go to the end. I want to do one cycle of colors all the way through the end. I would just add a keyframe. And a keyframe is essentially a stopping point where it says this is where we set a value that we want. And between two keyframes, the value is going to gradually change. Now, HSL adjust is a little bit weird, but there are ways to correct for its oddities. So I'm going to see what happens if I set the hue to 1. It looks like it's going to work. Okay, it will work. Sometimes HSL adjust behaves a bit strangely. If I set the hue to 0 at one point and 1 at another point, it says that those are the same, because technically they are. Adding 1 to the hue is just the same as rotating 1 time around the entire color circle. So the colors you get at the end are the same. So sometimes I have to put a keyframe here and say I want the hue exactly halfway in the middle to be 0.5. But that didn't happen this time. So I animated this, and let's see how it looks when I play it. Okay, great. We have a color cycle going through the whole video. Now, the strength in Vegas comes with selecting the type of gradation between keyframes that you want. In Kdenlive, there's only a few options. You can do a smooth, I think it's a smooth fade, which is where it starts and ends slower than it is in the middle. There's a linear fade where it's the same speed throughout, but it's very opaque. It's not very helpful what those mean. So say I wanted to control the pace at which this moved throughout the entire effect. I can right-click on one of these points in the animation, and I can say that I want to change it to, for example, a fast fade, or a slow fade, or a sharp fade, etc. You can change the type of fade, and hold just means that you don't change the value at all until you get to the next keyframe. But changing the type of fade will change the behavior of the effect, and the lines actually show you what's happening here. So I changed it to a fast fade, and we can see that the line now quickly goes up and sort of levels off at the end. So what this tells me is that the hue is going to increase very quickly at the outset of the color shift, and then as it gets towards the end, it's going to slow down a little bit. And I think we'll be able to see that pretty clearly if I play it again. Definitely slowing down. Yeah, so you can control the type of fade, the type of gradation between keyframes. I think that's very powerful. And then lastly, this is something you can also do in Kdenlive, but you can move the keyframes wherever you want. In the video event, it doesn't have to be start to finish. You can put as many keyframes as you want in the middle. Maybe I want to put another keyframe here. I'll set the hue to, I don't know, 0.4 and see what happens. So now the effect is off. And then suddenly we see some crazy colors. And now they're gone. So animating effects is something that I use a lot. And I just want to show you, there's a reason why I picked HSL Adjust, because I talked about making the backgrounds for my diamond videos. I put at the very end of my little test bed just a plain color gradient pattern that goes in a circle. So I add HSL Adjust, I animate the hue shift, and I say that I want to go all the way to the end. I'll add a keyframe, I'll make the hue go to 1, and then we play this, and we can see something very cool. We see the colors cycle. They go around in a circle. So I use these hue cyclings for a lot of my effects. That was animating effects. Another thing that I want to talk about is the panning and cropping functionality in Vegas. This is something that Kdenlive can do, but it's much more user-friendly in Vegas, because Vegas gives you this option to see where your video is and what you're panning. So I typically use the pan and crop function for a single video event if I'm zooming in. You can use it to zoom out as well. It's not like it doesn't work. But typically you think of panning and cropping as you want to focus on a certain part of the video. So say I want to zoom in on the mountain. I can drag and move this little rectangle as I want to. Whereas if I want to zoom out, or I want to alter something that affects the entire video, I instead go to this little menu on the track, and I go to track motion. And track motion, this controls not the window in which you're focusing, but this controls the resulting output of the video. So say I zoom out here, I'll just drag this. This is actually zooming in. I think I made a mistake. But if I want to make the track bigger, then I drag this around and I increase the size, and this essentially says my entire track is getting bigger. If I zoom out by shrinking this, you'll notice that the video track is getting smaller, but I'm still only looking at the mountain here. I'm still zoomed in because pan and crop comes before the track motion. So even if I stay zoomed out here, and then I go to my video and I pan all the way in to the very tip of the mountain, it's still not going to fill up the rest of the video. And this is a weakness in Kdenlive. Kdenlive, if you want to zoom in on a part of the video and you don't want it to fill the whole screen, it can be a bit of a hassle because the transform effect is a bit limited. It tends to function exactly the same way on a track and on a video event. So if I wanted to zoom in on the very tip of the mountain, I couldn't also have this empty space. I mean, I could, but it would be a little bit complicated. So I'm going to get rid of the track motion here by just setting it to default. I'll get rid of the pan and crop here by setting this to default. You can set it to default anytime you want to get rid of the changes you need. The real reason why I want to show you about panning and cropping is because of older videos with logos that tend to be in the 4:3 aspect ratio, like this one. So a lot of these older ones aren't equipped for widescreen presentations. So something I do all the time if I'm editing in Vegas is I will go into Event Pan and Crop, and then I will choose the preset 16:9 widescreen TV aspect ratio. Now what this does is this will crop the video exactly the minimum amount that it can, where it now has a 16:9 ratio instead of a 4:3. And for most old logos, this usually is good enough. We can see that sometimes it isn't. With Good Times Home Video, for example, we have a few black bars on the side. And this is just because of whatever the VHS capture source was, ended up actually including some of this empty space in the video itself. But that's okay. We can use pan and crop. Say we want to keep this in a 16:9 aspect ratio, which we do. I want to hold aspect ratio or lock aspect ratio. This is turned on. Size about center, I will also leave on because I want to keep this centered. And I just drag this in a little bit more, and we can get rid of those quite nicely. Now it looks like it's still not perfect. Maybe I want to drag it a little bit more to center it. I can do that. I just drag it. Now you'll notice I tried to drag it to the left a little bit, and I couldn't do it. And that's because I actually had this setting turned on from a previous video that says move in Y only. And this is quite powerful. If you only want to pan in a certain direction, you can click this and you can choose whether you want to move it all the way or only in X or only in Y, and that will prevent you from accidentally changing a setting that you don't want. So I'm going to turn on move freely now, and I think that's about as good as I'm going to get. Maybe I'll drag it a little bit this way so I don't get any of those black bars. So panning and cropping, just more powerful than Kdenlive because the track motion is different. Another thing I want to show you is now I've cropped this to a 16:9 aspect ratio. I go to track motion and say I want to zoom out on this a little bit. I'll lock the aspect ratio here. I'll prevent any movement so that it stays centered. And then I'll just shrink this. And now the video is still widescreen, but I shrunk it instead of going back to a 4:3. So let's see, what else did I want to show you in this? If you want to create a transition between effects, or between video clips. This can be done quite nicely by just taking the two events that you want to transition and then dragging them together. If you drag the events together, then you'll get a bit of time where they fade between each other. Note that you are not restricted to having a fade when you do this. You can go to the transitions menu and it will show you all sorts of video transitions that you can add. You can change these as you like. Say I want to do a, I don't know, dissolve. What do these look like? So, ooh, subtractive dissolve. That looks kind of cool. Let me try this. Ooh, I like that. So essentially, if you want to create a transition in Vegas, you drag the two events together to control the length of the transition first. You can change it anytime you want, and then you go to the transitions menu and actually look at the type of transition that you want to add. Kdenlive does something a little bit weird with transitions. They use something called compositions, and compositions only work between video events on different tracks. So I tend to have a little bit more issues with compositions in Kdenlive. I think transitions are much more straightforward, and once you set the transition type that you want, you can change the length of it. You can also control the fade type just like you can with animating effects. So say I want it to be a little bit more like the Paramount logo for a while, and I play this. Let's see what it looks like now. Okay, it doesn't look like much because we're at the very end of the video, but you can control the type of fade. The audio between these will fade as well. You can control that too. So just a lot you can do with transitions in Vegas. Generated media. The thing I want to talk about is not titles. I use those very rarely, but I do want to show you an example of generating some media. You can do quite a lot with generated media in Vegas. My favorite type of generated media is noise textures because they look cool. So let me move on to this noise texture. And something to note about any generated media is that you can see that these have the animate buttons because you can change the properties of the generated media just like you can change the properties of an effect. So say I like this type of noise, but I want to change the color of the noise over time. Well, I'm going to animate, and it may take a minute because Vegas is very buggy and slow. I want to animate the type of color that I'm using as color 1. And maybe I say at the end of the video, I want it to be red. So let's change it to red. It's really slowing down now because we're dealing with 8K video here. And can you control the fade here? Let me see. Oh, you can. I want to quickly make this look like red. Now let me change the color of the foreground as well. But I'm going to do something a little different here, because I want to show you that you can animate two different things separately. So this is color 2. It's currently white, and maybe I want to change it to turquoise. But I only want to start this halfway through the video event. I'm going to drag that to 5. And then let's say I want to add another keyframe at the very end. It says not responding. Tell me what else is new. Oh, that doesn't look good. Let's bring this back. Alright, there we go. Let me add another keyframe at the end here. I'll change this to turquoise. It's gonna take its sweet time. Maybe I also want this to be a fast fade. Now let's see what this looks like. It's probably going to be very laggy when it plays. Okay, yeah, it's going to be extremely laggy. So I'll pause it at a few crucial moments. So we can see we're almost halfway through the video event, and the black color has transformed to red, but the white color has not transformed at all. So let's go over the halfway point. Now we can see the white color starting to transform into turquoise, and we go to the very end, and the colors have pretty much changed. So I think, did I cover everything I wanted to? I covered animating effects, I covered the pan and crop, I made a distinction between the pan and crop and the video, the track motion. Oh, I guess two things I'll end on. One thing that I want to add, I'll get rid of the effects on these two videos, is you can add a video event or a video effect to multiple events on the same track, if you so choose. Say I want, let's do min and max is a very buggy effect, so I won't do that. Let's look at pixelate. So I drag pixelate onto Paramount. It doesn't look like anything. Let me choose a more obvious effect. Yeah, let's do TV Simulator. Bad sync. Okay, so I have this effect on Paramount. Looks terrible, which is exactly the way I like it. Now say I wanted to add this also to everything else that I have in my test bed here. I could drag this on to every single video event, or I could get rid of it on Paramount and just drag it onto the track. And you can see that now it's still on Paramount, but if I keep playing, it's now also on Good Times Home Video. It's also going to be on our test pattern. It's also going to be on our noise texture and my Marigold logo I had waiting in the back in case I needed it. So I use track effects. I tend to prefer adding effects to a track unless I need to time some animations precisely, because I think it's a little bit more consistent. If anything is wrong with the panning and cropping of your video, then adding the effect to the entire track will help ensure that it covers everything. You can also add effects to the master, which is adding an effect to the entire output. So say I want to invert everything, even maybe things that are in other tracks. So I'll make a new track and I'll move Good Times into a different track. Now we can see that it no longer has the TV effect on it because I put it in a different track, but because I added the invert effect to the master, it still gets inverted. So a lot of times if I put my logo in the corner of a video and I want the logo, maybe I have some G major effect that changes the color and makes something look squiggly and glitchy. Usually I put the color effect on the master and I put the glitchy squiggly effect on the video of choice that's not my corner logo, because I don't want my corner logo to look glitchy, but I do want it to have that G major color. And then the last thing I'll show you is not really an effect or procedure, it's just something to keep in mind in Vegas, in newer versions of Vegas. Let me get rid of the track effects here. The track motion, let me turn that off as well. So you can see that the quality of this video here looks absolutely atrocious. This is my original Marigold logo video, and I rendered it in 8K. And if I were to render this video, which would take a long time, it would also show up in 8K. So this is something I've noticed when I'm dealing with newer versions of Vegas. Sometimes the video can be really blurry and nasty. It doesn't mean it's going to look like this on the output. Just check the settings of the video before you go into it. You can go to your project media, you can right click and hit properties, and it will show you that this is indeed an 8K video, and if you render it, it will look much better, but sometimes the preview window isn't the best at showing you this. And draft quarter does tend to look bad, but do keep in mind that the Paramount video here looked a lot better, so I think it's just something that has to deal with these high quality 8K videos. This I know was a little bit aimless, didn't really have any specific end goal in mind, but I did just want to show you some little things that I do in Vegas. I'm obviously still working towards getting everything to move on to Kdenlive. I would rather do as much in Kdenlive as I can, because I think it's better to share the effects and the fun stuff I do in a program that's legally free. But of course, my history is with Vegas, and I can't just pretend that it hasn't helped me a whole lot over the years. So hopefully these little tricks have helped you, and feel free to ask questions in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.